Hey everybody, it's Mr. Fote here. I wanted to make a video for us to be able to go over the cardiovascular system. I had a lot of people who were asking me for a way to review this, going over some of the content that we talked about in class. So I figured I'd make a video for you. I'm trying to make this quick so you can watch it maybe 1 or 2 times before you study for our test on Tuesday. Now, before I get into some of the specifics of the cardiovascular system, I want to start out by defining what the cardiovascular system is, and mainly what its function is, which would be to move blood to every part of the body. And we do that in a variety of ways. Namely, inside your blood, you're going to have arteries, capillaries, and veins. Let's discuss what each of those do. Now, when you have oxygen-rich blood, and it's pumped at high blood pressure through blood vessels, we would call those arteries. And when you have to get your blood into maybe places that arteries aren't able to necessarily go, you have tiny blood vessels that are called capillaries. Capillaries are distinct because sometimes they allow blood to leak out. Now, when your blood has gone through your body and it's distributed the oxygen that your lungs have given to it, we would say that the blood has then gone back into your veins and it's returning back to the heart to repeat the process of being oxygenated and pumped back out. And if you're wondering what keeps blood moving through those arteries, that would be the rhythmic contractions or the pumping of ventricles, which is just a steady movement of blood being squeezed throughout your body by your heart. That's kind of the engine of your cardiovascular system. Now, there are some things that can cause our hearts to be overworked and overtaxed, namely if we have high blood pressure. We talked about in class how high blood pressure can kind of be like when you're trying to drink a milkshake through a straw. It goes a lot slower than if you were trying to drink something like a soda or water out of that same straw. Namely because that substance is just a thicker liquid. It takes more work to get that through a smaller space. Part of that would be understanding our cholesterol levels. And cholesterol itself is a fat-like substance associated with atherosclerosis, which has to do with the overworking and the overtaxing of our heart muscle. Now, all things considered, say that our blood is doing really, really well. Let's go through and kind of understand the process starting at the vena cava by which blood would go through the cardiovascular system to finally arrive back at the vena cava again. So we start at the vena cava and blood goes in, it goes into the right atrium. Your heart is made up of 4 different chambers, one being the right and left atrium, the other ones being the right and left ventricles. So we start at the right atrium and then from the right atrium it passes into the right ventricle. After the right ventricle, it's going to go into the pulmonary arteries where it gets transported past your lungs. This is important because when you breathe in air, that oxygen that you're taking in is actually going into your bloodstream to be carried out through your blood to all the different parts of your body. Now, after the lungs, it's going to go into the pulmonary veins by which it would go into the left atrium. After it goes into left atrium, it would go into the left ventricle, where after it's in the left ventricle, it gets put into the aorta. The aorta is what's going to be carrying that blood out into arteries that have branched off a bigger artery. So now our oxygenated blood is being carried throughout a lot of the veins that are inside of our body, our arteries that are inside our body. And then after they're in those arteries, they would branch off into capillaries. Capillaries are going to be what carries that oxygenated blood to all of the different little parts of our body, like our fingers and our toes. After that oxygen has been spread out to all the different parts, it's going to go back into veins, where the veins are going to carry that oxygen poor blood back into our heart and going through the vena cava to begin the process again. And the component of blood that is responsible for transporting oxygen is the red blood cells. And that's different than just the blood itself. We're going to talk about in a little bit how there's a difference between a red blood cell and perhaps the plasma that is helping to carry these things back and forth. However, let's talk a little bit about the nature of the blood itself and some of the different things that are part of the blood. So in your blood, you have different components. lots of different things that are making all of that happen. One of which is called a platelet. The platelet is a cell fragment that controls bleeding. When you get cut, for example, the platelets inside your blood are going to produce fibrin that forms a clot to keep all the blood that you were once bleeding inside your body. It's a protective mechanism. And that has to do a lot with how our blood is put together in the first place. But say that we want to understand the types of blood, because there's different ways that we can understand each person's blood. And in class, we studied the four main types, A, B, AB, and O. A blood is going to have molecular markers that are A type. B blood is going to have red blood cells with molecular markers that are B type. AB blood is going to have molecular markers that are both A and B. And say that someone has O type blood, they're not going to have any molecular markers outside their red blood cell. Now, with each red blood cell has clumping proteins in that plasma that's carrying that red blood cell around to distribute the oxygen. Now, the nice thing about our plasma is that say that we have type A blood, we're going to have a type B clumping protein, because a type B clumping protein is only going to clump with type B blood, so on and so forth. Now, if I have a type B blood, I'm going to have a type A clumping protein inside my plasma because my blood isn't going to clot on its own. The only problems we run into with this is blood transfusion. Say that I want to take my blood and put it into somebody else's blood. For example, if I have type A blood and I try to put it into someone who has type B blood, that's going to cause blood clots because the person with type B blood is naturally going to be producing type A clumping proteins, which are going to clot with my blood and cause a bunch of problems. Now, when we get into people who have type AB blood or type O blood, it gets a little different. Say that someone has type AB blood. They have both A and B's molecular markers. They're not going to have any type of clumping protein because if they did, their blood would automatically clot. However, if someone has type O blood with no molecular markers, they're going to produce both types of clumping protein because the clumping proteins don't have any molecular markers to clump to. Now, this makes blood transfusion a little tricky, but I'll try to explain it the best I can. If you have type A blood, you can give or receive type A blood to another person. You can always receive the type of blood that you already have. Now, say that my friend has type B blood and I try to put type A blood into the bloodstream of them. Their body is naturally going to clump with that blood or clot with that blood because they produce the clumping protein that matches my blood. So if I tried to put the red blood cell of AB blood into, for example, my friend with A blood, that wouldn't work because that person with B type blood is going to be producing an A clumping protein that would clump with the A molecular markers on AB blood, so on and so forth. The only blood that can be distributed to any blood type is going to be O blood. O blood has no molecular markers, and so we can put that inside of any body without worrying what it's going to do. The problem is that someone with type O blood can only receive type O blood because they produce both A and B's clumping proteins. So any type of blood other than O is going to clump inside their body. That's a brief overview of what we did. I feel like I went a million miles an hour and I definitely left some things out. However, I wanted to be able to make something for you all to study off of for your cardiovascular system test. If you have any questions, let me know. Send me an email. You'll see me in class. I'd be happy to answer those for you guys. But other than that, I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you later.